The Queen's Order Queen Alia sat on her throne, her eyes scanning the great hall. The room was filled with her loyal warriors, their armor gleaming under the bright light. The grand hall echoed with the sounds of whispers, the air thick with tension. Today she had decided to make an example of the human who had been causing problems for her empire. The word of his deeds had spread far and wide, and Queen Alia was not one to let anyone humiliate her or her people. The human, Tom, had traveled from planet to planet, defying the empire at every turn. He had defeated many of her soldiers and embarrassed her forces, causing her reputation to suffer. Queen Alia had enough of this human and decided it was time to teach him a lesson he would never forget. She had ordered him captured and brought. Before her dot in the center of the hall stood Kara, one of her fiercest and most trusted warriors. Kara's tall, muscular frame was covered in battle-worn armor. She stood tall and proud, her face a mask of strength and determination. Queen Alia had chosen Kara for a reason. Kara was undefeated in battle, and her skill with a sword was unmatched. She was the perfect warrior to handle the human and make sure that he would pay for his actions. Kara. Queen Alia's voice cut through the murmurs of the court, and the room fell silent. You will humiliate this human in front of me and my warriors. Show him the power of the empire. Show him that no one can defy us and live to tell the tale. Kara gave a respectful nod. She had never failed her queen. But there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that hinted at doubt. It was a small, almost imperceptible feeling, one that even Kara couldn't fully understand. But she quickly pushed it aside, knowing that she had a job to do. The Queen's orders were absolute. The massive doors at the far end of the hall opened with a loud groan, and in stepped Tom, his hands bound behind his back. He was tall, strong, and rugged, his face set with a defiant expression. His clothes were torn from his journey, but his eyes were clear and full of fire. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the warriors, but he didn't flinch. He had been captured, yes, but he wasn't afraid. The guards dragged him forward, forcing him to his knees in front of Queen Alia. She looked down at him with a cruel smile. You've caused much trouble for my empire, human. But today, you will learn the price of defying me. Tom raised his head, his eyes narrowing as he stared at her. I don't take orders from tyrants, he said, his voice strong and steady. You'll have to kill me if you want me to stop. The Queen's smile widened. It's not death you should fear, she said coldly. It's the humiliation. Kara will teach you your place. The room fell into a tense silence. Kara stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. The other warriors watched closely, eager to see this human brought low. Kara's eyes met Tom's, and for a moment, she saw something in them, something that made her pause. Tom didn't look like he was afraid of her. He didn't look like he cared about the Queen or the Empire. He was just a man standing there, ready to face whatever came next. Kara had fought many battles, but something about this human made her feel uneasy. But she shook the feeling off. She had a duty. She was the Queen's best warrior, and she couldn't allow this human to get the better of her. She stepped forward, drawing her sword from its sheath. The blade gleamed in the light as she raised it high, prepared to strike. Get up, Kara commanded. Fight me, human. Tom stood slowly, his chains rattling as he lifted his arms. He wasn't given a weapon, just his bare hands, but he was ready. Kara lunged at him with incredible speed. Her sword aimed for his chest, but Tom was quick. He sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the blade, and grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back in one swift motion. Kara grunted in surprise. She had never expected him to be so fast, so skilled. He was only human, and yet he was holding his own against her, something no one had ever done. She tried to break free, but Tom's grip was strong. For a moment, she felt vulnerable, and the thought crossed her mind that maybe she had underestimated him. The Queen's laughter echoed through the hall. "What is this? A human has the audacity to try and fight my greatest warrior?" Her voice was filled with amusement, but underneath it was a clear sense of danger. "Kara, finish him." Kara, frustrated and embarrassed, kicked out with her leg, knocking Tom off balance. He stumbled backward, but quickly regained his footing. The warriors in the crowd began to murmur, their excitement growing. They were witnessing something they never expected: a human who was standing up to Kara, their undefeated champion. Kara charged again, her sword raised high. But this time Tom was ready. He blocked her attack with his forearm, using his body to force her back. His movements were quick, sharp, and full of precision. Kara gritted her teeth, realizing that this wasn't just a fight for her pride. It was a fight for her reputation. As well, the clash of steel rang out as Kara and Tom fought fiercely. Kara's sword struck down, but Tom managed to deflect it, narrowly avoiding a fatal blow. The fight was going longer than anyone expected. The Queen stood up from her throne, her eyes narrowing as she watched the battle unfold. This was not how she had planned things. Kara was supposed to crush him, make him beg for mercy, but instead, the human was holding his ground. Tom was exhausted. His muscles were burning, his body bruised from the blows he had taken. But he wasn't about to give up. He had fought against overwhelming odds before, and he would do it again. He wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for something more. Kara took a step back, wiping the sweat from her brow. She was tired too, but she could see the growing respect in the eyes of the warriors. She couldn't let this human win. The Queen's voice rang out once more. "Kara, this has gone on long enough. End it." Kara's heart raced. She couldn't let the Queen down. She had no choice but to end this now. With a fierce cry, Kara lunged at Tom again. But this time, something was different. Tom's instincts kicked in, and he moved faster than ever before. He ducked under her strike, grabbed her by the wrist, and flipped her onto the ground with a sudden move that left the entire room silent. Kara lay on the ground, stunned. She had never been defeated like this before. The Queen's expression twisted into fury. She stood up and shouted, "Enough!" The warriors were silent. Even the Queen's most loyal guards were stunned by what had just happened. Tom, breathing heavily but standing tall, looked at Kara. His eyes were filled with defiance. He had won, but the battle was far from over. The unexpected fight, the grand hall fell into a deep silence as the fight ended with a shocking twist. Queen Alia stood at the throne, her eyes wide with disbelief. Kara, the Queen's greatest warrior, the one who had never known defeat, was now lying on the ground, struggling to catch her breath. And it was the human, Tom, who had done the unthinkable. He had bested Kara in battle, something no one, not even the Queen, had imagined possible. Tom stood in the center of the arena, his body bruised and battered from the fight. His chest heaved as he took in deep breaths, trying to steady himself. He had never expected to defeat Kara, but in that moment, everything he had fought for, everything he had endured, came rushing to the surface. His willpower, his defiance, his belief in something greater than survival had been the driving force behind his actions. Kara slowly pushed herself up from the ground, her face flushed with anger and shame. She had never been beaten before, and the humiliation burned in her chest. She had failed not only herself, but also the Queen who had entrusted her with the task of humiliating this human. And now, the Queen would surely take her anger out on both of them. As Kara stood, her eyes met Tom's. She didn't see the defiance in his eyes anymore. Instead, there was something else there, something she hadn't expected: respect. He didn't look at her as a warrior to be defeated, but as an opponent worthy of a fair fight. Kara's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she wanted to charge at him, to make him pay for this defeat. But something held her back. She realized that she had never fought a battle like this before. A battle where the outcome wasn't about strength alone, but something deeper. Queen Alia's voice broke through. The tension, sharp and cold. "Kara, you have failed me," she said, her eyes narrowing as she looked down at the fallen warrior. "You were supposed to humiliate him, to crush his spirit. Instead, you have made a mockery of me in front of my court." Kara flinched at the queen's words, her heart sinking in her chest. "My queen," she began, but Alia raised a hand to silence her. "You will pay for your failure," the queen declared. Her eyes then turned to Tom, who was still standing tall, his body battered but proud. "And you," Alia continued, her voice dripping. "With venom, you will regret ever defying me." Tom straightened, his eyes locking with the queen's. He knew this wasn't over. He had won the fight, yes, but there was no victory when facing the wrath of someone like Queen Alia. "I don't regret anything," he said firmly. "You're the one who should regret underestimating me." The queen's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you've won? You think you're the one in control?" Her laughter echoed through the hall, mocking him. "You're nothing more than a tool, human. And now you will learn just how much power I hold." Tom's heart raced, but he refused to show fear. "You can threaten me all you want, but it won't change what's already happened. I've beaten your best warrior. That means something." Alia's gaze shifted, and her eyes narrowed as she thought about her next move. She had been humiliated, yes, but she wasn't one to back down easily. She needed to regain control of the situation, and she needed to show her warriors that no one, not even a human, could challenge her authority without consequences. "You're right," the queen said coldly. "You've defeated Kara, but that doesn't mean you're free. It means you're mine. I will make sure you pay for this humiliation." A few of the warriors in the court looked uncertain, but most remained silent, their eyes glued to the scene unfolding in front of them. They knew the queen's wrath was not something anyone could survive. But even so, there was an undercurrent of admiration for the human who had dared to stand up to her. Queen Alia's voice rang out once more. "Kara, for your failure, you will be punished. You will marry this human. Let that be the consequence of your weakness." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Everyone in the court gasped. Kara's eyes widened, and for a moment, she could barely comprehend what had just been said. Marriage? To the human who had just defeated her? Tom looked from the queen to Kara, a sense of disbelief washing over him. He had expected some kind of punishment, but this was far beyond what he could have imagined. He wasn't sure what was worse, the queen's anger or the fact that Kara, the fierce warrior he had just fought, would now be forced into a marriage with him. Kara's face flushed with anger, and she stepped forward, her fists clenched. "You cannot be serious," she growled. "I am not some prize to be claimed by a human." Alia's expression remained cold and unyielding. "You are mine to command, Kara, and you will obey." Kara's jaw tightened as she stood there, seething. She wanted to lash out, to fight back, but she knew the consequences of defying the queen would be far worse than anything she could imagine. Her gaze turned to Tom, her face filled with frustration and confusion. He was the last person she wanted to bow to, but now she had no choice. Her fate had been sealed. Tom stood silently, not sure what to say. This was not how he had imagined this would go. He had fought to prove a point, to show that humans weren't weak. But now he was caught in the middle of a situation he couldn't control. Kara, his reluctant partner in this strange punishment, was just as trapped as he was. "We'll see how you handle your new life, Kara," Queen Aaliyah said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can defy me." With those final words, the queen turned and left the hall, her warriors trailing behind her. The air in the room felt heavy as the doors slammed shut behind them, leaving Kara and Tom alone in the arena. Kara stood there, her fists still clenched, and finally, her voice broke the silence. "I don't want this," she muttered, her voice low and full of anger. "But I have no choice, do I?" Tom looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "I didn't ask for this either," he said quietly. "But we're in this together now." Kara turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and something else, something she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. "We'll see how long that lasts," she said, her tone cold. The queen's punishment. The air in the grand hall was thick with tension as Kara and Tom stood in the aftermath of their forced marriage. Queen Alia's decree had left both of them stunned, but as the room emptied, only silence remained. The court had witnessed the strange turn of events, and now they were left alone with the weight of what had just happened. Kara's eyes burned with frustration, while Tom, still processing the shock, stood quietly beside her. Kara had never felt so humiliated. Her entire life had been defined by her strength in combat, her loyalty to the queen, and her role as an undefeated warrior. Now she was bound to a human by the queen's punishment, a punishment that felt more like a mockery than a justice. She had been humiliated in front of the queen's court and forced to marry someone she had fought, her hands clenched into fists as she glared at Tom, who stood with his head slightly bowed, his expression conflicted. This was all too much. Her whole world had just been upended, and there was no way out. Tom, for his part, didn't know what to make of the situation. 1 minute he had fought to survive in the arena, outsmarting Kara in a battle that was meant to break him, and now he was tied to her in a way he had never expected. He had no desire to cause harm, especially not to Kara, who had been nothing but a fierce opponent. But now, this marriage forced upon them, both had created a new reality, one that neither of them was ready for. Kara turned away from him, unable to look at the man who had, in a strange twist of fate, become her partner. The queen had sentenced her to this fate, and she could already feel the weight of the chains that had been wrapped around her future. There would be no escape, no way to undo this humiliation. Tom stepped forward cautiously, his voice low. "Look, I know this isn't what either of us wanted, but we need to figure this out." Kara spun around, her eyes blazing with anger. "Figure it out? How are we supposed to figure out something like this?" she snapped. "You've humiliated me in front of the entire court, and now we're supposed to live this out as if it's some kind of joke?" Tom winced at her words but held his ground. "I didn't ask for this either, Kara. I'm just as trapped as you are. I don't want this any more than you do." Kara's jaw tightened as she turned away from him again. "We don't have a choice, do we?" she muttered bitterly. "The queen's orders are absolute. There's no running from this." Tom took a step closer, his voice softening. "I'm not going to make you do anything. But if we're going to survive this, we need to work together. I'm not your enemy. The queen is. And she's the one we need to focus on." Kara hesitated, her anger momentarily fading. She had always relied on herself, always trusted her strength and ability to fight. But in this strange situation, she found herself questioning everything she had known. She looked at Tom, at the human who had just defeated her in battle, and saw something she hadn't expected: understanding. He was no ordinary human. And maybe, just maybe, he had a point. Fine, Kara said, her voice laced with frustration. We'll work together. But only because I have no other choice. Tom nodded. We need to be careful. Queen Alia isn't going to let us get away with this. She want to remind us both who's in charge. Kara turned to face him, her expression still angry but with a hint of something else, a growing awareness that she didn't have to be alone in this. I'm not afraid of her, she said firmly. I've faced worse. Tom smiled, a small knowing smile. I'm sure you have. But this is different. Alia is powerful, and she won't stop until she gets what she wants. We need to stay one step ahead of her. As they began to talk strategy, the sound of footsteps outside the chamber caught their attention. Kara immediately stiffened, her body on alert. They both knew that the Queen's wrath was not something that could be ignored for long. The door creaked open, and two of the Queen's guards stepped inside. Your presence is required by the Queen, one of them said, his voice cold and impersonal. Kara exchanged a quick glance with Tom before nodding. Lead the way. The guards didn't speak as they turned to leave, motioning for Kara and Tom to follow. As they walked through the long corridors of the palace, Kara could feel her heart racing. Every step took her closer to Queen Alia, and the fear of facing the Queen again gripped her tightly. But this time, it wasn't just about her. It was about Tom, too. They were bound together now, and neither of them had any idea what Alia would do next. When they entered the Queen's private chamber, Alia was sitting on her throne, her posture regal and commanding. Her eyes immediately fixed on Kara and Tom. As they entered, her gaze sharp and calculating. You failed me, Queen Alia said without preamble, her voice dripping with disdain. And now you've embarrassed me further by bonding with the human. Kara held her head high, refusing to show weakness. I did what you ordered, my queen. But I will not allow myself to be used like this. Alia's expression hardened. You will obey, Kara. I am your queen, and you will remember that. Tom stepped forward, his voice steady but challenging. You can't control us. You may have the power to punish, but you can't break us. The Queen's eyes flashed with anger, but she remained seated. You're bold, human. But your defiance will cost you. Both of you will suffer for this. You will live out this marriage, and you will prove to me that you are worthy of my empire. Tom clenched his fists but said nothing. Kara's heart pounded in her chest, and she could feel the heat of Alia's gaze burning into her. The Queen's power was overwhelming, but for the first time, Kara didn't feel like an obedient soldier. She felt like a prisoner. Alia stood, her eyes narrowing. You both will be tested. If you can prove your loyalty, perhaps you'll be worthy of my forgiveness. But if you fail, your punishment will be worse than anything you've endured. Kara felt a knot form in her stomach. There was no way out of this. They were trapped. But Tom's words echoed in her mind. They had to survive this together. They had to fight back, even if it meant facing the Queen's wrath. Leave my presence, Alia commanded, her voice final. And remember, your fate is in my hands. Kara and Tom turned to leave, the weight of the Queen's words hanging over them. As they walked back through the halls, Kara glanced at Tom, her expression unreadable. We need to stay strong, she said quietly, for both of us. They reached the doors to the Queen's chambers and paused. Kara's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing. This was the moment that would determine everything. She looked at Tom, who nodded to her. He was ready. Kara pushed open the doors, and they slipped inside. The room was vast, filled with luxurious tapestries, elaborate furniture, and the cold presence of the Queen's power. They didn't have much time. The guards would be back soon, and the Queen would not be far behind. Tom began searching through the shelves and drawers, pulling out maps, scrolls, and records that seemed to hold the Queen's most closely guarded secrets. Kara kept watch, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. The sound of footsteps grew louder. They were running out of time. Suddenly, the door to the chamber burst open, and Queen Alia entered, her eyes burning with fury. "You think you can defy me?" she hissed, her voice venomous. "You think you can take what's mine?" Kara stood, tall, facing the Queen without fear. "It's not about taking what's yours. It's about taking back what's ours. Your reign is over, Alia." The Queen's eyes flashed with anger. "You dare challenge me? After everything I've done for you, Kara?" Kara stepped forward, her eyes cold. "You've done nothing for me. You've used me, controlled me, and now you've turned your own warriors against you. It's over," Alia sneered. "You're a traitor, and you'll regret this. Both of you." Before the Queen could make a move, Tom stepped forward, holding the scrolls they had gathered. "This is the evidence we need to bring you down, Alia. You've been manipulating the entire empire for your own gain. And now it ends." The Queen's eyes widened in shock. She took a step back, her face twisting with rage. "You think you can expose me? You think you can bring me to my knees?" Kara's voice was firm and resolute. "We don't need to bring you to your knees. You've already fallen. We're just finishing what you started." With that, they turned and bolted for the door, knowing they had only a few moments before the Queen would unleash her wrath. The palace was in chaos, guards running in every direction, and the rebels who had supported Kara and Tom in secret were already making their move. The Queen's control was slipping, and there was nothing she could do to stop it now. As Kara and Tom made their way to the escape tunnels, they heard the Queen's voice one last time, filled with venom. "You'll pay for this. You'll regret crossing me." Kara didn't look back. She knew that their fight wasn't over. But for the first time, she felt a sense of freedom, of victory. The rebellion had begun. Outside the palace, the night sky stretched above them, filled with the promise of a new dawn. Kara turned to Tom, her heart pounding with the adrenaline of their escape. "We did it," she said quietly, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Tom looked at her, his expression determined. This is just the beginning. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting for something bigger, for a future where they could stand as equals, free from the Queen's tyranny. Together, they would face whatever came next, and they would do it as partners, not just in marriage, but in rebellion. Tom nodded. "We will, together." Unlikely alliance days passed since Queen Alia's punishment had been enforced, and each day felt like a heavy burden for Kara and Tom. The palace, once a place of pride and strength for Kara, now felt like a prison. Her every move was watched, her every word weighed. Tom, too, found himself trapped in a world that was foreign to him. As a human, he had never imagined that he would be bound by chains of political and personal power, let alone forced into a union with someone as formidable as Kara. But there was something in the way Kara carried herself, something that made Tom begin to understand that the woman he had fought and won against was not as cold and ruthless as the Queen believed her to be. In the hours they spent together, as they prepared for whatever the Queen would throw at them next, they began to talk more. They shared stories of their pasts, their homes, and their motivations. And through this exchange, a bond started to form, something neither had expected. Kara still carried the weight of her defeat, though. The humiliation of losing to a human in front of the Queen's court was not something she could easily shake off. But as she spent more time with Tom, she began to feel a strange connection with him. He wasn't like the other humans she had encountered, weak and submissive. He had strength, determination, and a fire inside him that mirrored her own. Evening, they sat together in a small, quiet chamber, the shadows of night creeping across the floor. Kara stared out of the window, watching the stars twinkle in the distance. She had never paid much attention to the stars before, but tonight, they seemed different. The darkness of the universe no longer felt like a void. It felt full of possibilities. No, Tom said, breaking the silence. I never expected any of this. I came here, thinking I'd just be another soldier in some war, but I never imagined being married to one of the fiercest warriors in the galaxy. Kara glanced at him, her lips curling into a faint, reluctant smile. Believe me, I never expected it either, she said, her voice heavy with the weight of her words. But we don't always get to choose our fate, do we? No, Tom agreed, we don't. But that doesn't mean we can't change it. Kara turned her head to face him, her brow furrowed in thought. What do you mean by that? Tom leaned forward, his eyes locked onto hers. I mean, we don't have to play by the Queen's rules. She may hold the power now, but we're not. Helpless. If we work together, we might be able to change things. Kara looked at him for a long moment, studying his face. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. His words were filled with determination, something that reminded her of the warriors she had once led, before she had been tied to Alia's will. She realized then that Tom had a point. The Queen had placed them in this situation, but they still had a choice. They could let the Queen control their lives, or they could fight back. We're in a difficult situation, Kara said slowly, her voice filled with an edge of uncertainty. But we do have strength. I've never backed down from a fight before. And I'm not going to start now. But it's not just about fighting the Queen, it's about fighting for something better. Tom nodded. Exactly. We have a chance to change things. To bring down the Queen's tyranny. Kara's eyes softened. And how do you suppose we do that? Tom's smile was small but filled with confidence. We start by building trust. We need to be able to count on each other. We need to understand each other. If we can do that, then we can make a real difference. Kara was quiet for a moment. She had spent so many years in the service of Queen Alia, fighting for the Empire, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to fight for something she truly believed in. Her entire existence had been defined by loyalty to the Queen. But now she found herself questioning everything. Could she really defy Alia? Could she trust Tom? I fought against you, Tom, Kara said, her voice heavy with the weight of her past. But I've also seen your strength. I've seen that you're not like the others. Maybe you're right. Maybe we can change things. Tom smiled. I don't have all the answers, Kara, but I know one thing for sure. We're stronger together than we are apart. Kara nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. She had always been a warrior, a fighter who relied on her strength and skill. But now she was learning that strength didn't just come from weapons and battle strategies. It came from trust, from unity, from the willingness to stand side by side and fight for something bigger than yourself. As the days passed, Kara and Tom spent more time together. They trained, not just in combat, but in understanding each other. They talked about their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Kara began to realize that this strange, forced marriage was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could fight for something worth fighting for. One evening, as they trained together in the courtyard, Tom paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. I've been thinking, he said, his voice thoughtful. The Queen might have forced us together, but she doesn't control us. She can control our actions, but not our minds, not our hearts. Kara looked at him, her eyes narrowing as she considered his words. And what do you suggest we do about that? Tom's smile was full of quiet resolve. We play her game, but we do it on our terms. Kara's gaze sharpened as she began to understand what he meant. They didn't have to confront the Queen head-on, not yet. They could bide their time, wait for the right moment, and use the Queen's own power against her. "We need to be careful," Kara warned. "The Queen won't let us go easily. But I'm willing to fight for this, for something better." Tom nodded. "Then let's do it. Together." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Kara and Tom stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The future was uncertain, and the Queen's power loomed over them. But for the first time in a long while, Kara felt something stirring inside her, a sense of hope. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting for a future. And they would do it together. The rebellion and escape, the days that followed, felt like a strange mixture of tension and careful planning. Kara and Tom had come to realize that their forced marriage was both a punishment and an opportunity. They had no intention of living their lives under the thumb of Queen Alia, but they knew that any move against the Queen would require preparation, strategy, and most importantly, unity. They spent their days training, not only in combat, but in trust. They practiced together, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses, developing a bond that went beyond the chains of their forced union. Every time Kara looked at Tom, she saw not just the human who had humiliated her in the arena, but someone who was becoming more than just an ally. They were becoming partners in a cause, partners in a rebellion that had to be fought not with swords alone, but with minds, hearts, and courage. One evening, as they sat in their quarters after a long day of training, Kara turned to Tom, her eyes serious. "We've trained enough. It's time to make our move." Tom met her gaze, his expression firm. "I agree. We can't wait forever. If we're going to change anything, we need to act." Kara's hands tightened into fists. "We need to strike. When the Queen least expects it. We have to weaken her hold over the palace. The guards are loyal to her, but they're not invincible. They're human too." Tom nodded. "We've seen weaknesses. The Queen is ruthless, but she's also arrogant. She believes no one can challenge her. That's her mistake." Kara smiled slightly. "Arrogance is always a weakness, and we're going to use it against her." The plan was simple but risky. They would cause a distraction at the heart of the palace, something big enough to draw the Queen's attention and scatter her forces. Once the chaos began, Kara and Tom would make their move. They would infiltrate the Queen's inner chambers and steal the information they needed to destroy her plans from within. But first, they had to get past the guards, and that would require them to play the Queen's game just a little longer. The next morning, they began the first step of their plan. Kara had spent days studying the palace's layout, learning the routines of the guards and the weak points in the palace's defenses. She knew that the Queen's personal quarters were the most heavily guarded, but if they could disable the outer perimeter, they would stand a chance. Tom had suggested a distraction involving the weapons stockpile, and Kara had agreed. They knew that a loud explosion or fire would pull most of the palace's soldiers away from their posts. It wasn't foolproof, but it was their best chance. Tom took the lead, slipping into the storage rooms in the dead of night, while Kara stood watch. They moved silently through the darkened halls, the tension between them growing with every step. They both knew that if they were caught, there would be no second chance. Failure would mean death. As Tom set the fuse to the weapon storage, he glanced at Kara, who was waiting just outside. Their eyes met briefly, and in that fleeting moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. This was it. There was no going back. The explosion was deafening. The sound echoed through the halls, shaking the very foundation of the palace. Tom and Kara wasted no time. The guards outside the storage room scrambled toward the source of the chaos, just as they had planned. With the guards distracted, Kara and Tom rushed toward the Queen's quarters, moving as quickly as possible. Without attracting attention,